Hello and welcome to day 2 of Life Between the Trees, as we're thinking about the theme of trees in the Bible. And I'm Nikki Eastwood. I'm on the staff team as the vicar of St Mary's Upton. In times of stress and trouble, we all look for something solid to hold on to. You may be fortunate in living near and around trees. A colleague of mine has been recording his walks in wooded places. He'll soon be describing the oldest tree in England, which you're bound to know is the Big Belly Oak in Wiltshire. Now, the Big Belly Oak is a sessile oak, and it's in the Royal Forest of Savernake. It has a waist measurement of more than 11 metres, hence the belly in its name. And that tree has been around, we think, for a good old number of years, maybe 1,000, maybe even more, and probably the time of William the Conqueror, we think. Now, this colleague, who's a writer and a poet, an all-round wonderful human being, says in times of change and uncertainty, a good thing to do is get yourself close to something deeply rooted and to stay close to it as the storms come. What about a good old tree? In Holland, during the Second World War, some Jewish children were sheltered by a farming community, which happened to be Christians. After the war, those children came back to see their rescuers and say thank you, and there were lots of hugs. Remember hugs? One girl said of one of her protectors, it was like hugging an oak. They were going nowhere. Now, you might not want to hug an oak, but patting an old tree, which has seen life and survived, can ground us and root us. Now, a couple of years ago, I read this following passage to a couple of congregations and asked them to guess where it came from, to see what you think. One day, the trees went out to anoint a king for themselves. They said to the olive tree, "Be our king." But the olive tree answered, "Should I give up my oil, by which both gods and humans are honoured, to hold sway over the trees?" Next, the trees said to the fig tree, "Come and be our king." But the fig tree replied, "Should I give up my fruit, so good and sweet, to hold sway over the trees?" And then the trees said to the vine, "Come and be our king." But the vine answered, "Should I give up my wine, which cheers both gods and humans, to hold sway over the trees?" Finally, all the trees said to the thorn bush, "Come and be our king." And the thorn bush said to the trees, "If you really want to anoint me king over you, come and take refuge in my shade. But if not, then let fire come out of the thorn bush and consume the cedars of Lebanon." Now, where do you think that's from? We had all sorts of answers, but the answer is it's from the book of Judges in the Hebrew Bible. Now, Judges is not exactly a book of ease. It's a dark time, and there is a repetitive strain injury in the people by their making bad choices, doing evil, seeking power for its own sake, living unwisely. And in the middle, there is God constantly saying, "Where are you?" as the people move further away from him. Servant leadership is thin on the ground. We long for leaders to be just and generous. Some leaders are just, some are just terrible. And in Judges, the people have lost their way, and they're now ruled by thorny, thistly leaders. The story about the trees comes from a character called Jotham. Jotham is one of Gideon's many children left after Gideon has died. Gideon, of course, was that good but flawed leader of the people, that warrior against all appearances to the contrary, that mighty man of God. And as he has known victory, he has also known the challenge of seeking after God for solutions on how he should govern and rule. He leaves behind a power struggle of epic proportions. Gideon has said no to the Israelites, who want to make him their king, like the nations around them. Gideon says, "No, this isn't the way God wants it. I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." Now, there was one tiny flaw in Gideon's plan. The people didn't listen to the rule of God. And one of Gideon's 70 sons, Abimelech, having challenged the people to name him as king in the equivalent of a coup, is then proclaimed sovereign. Abimelech then murders most of his brothers. He shows from the first day that this is to be an earthly, flawed, brutal kingship, like every other nation, bloody and violent and deathly. Judges will tell us the story that will be repeated all the way through Kings and Chronicles and into the prophets. Some kings are just, but others are just awful. One of the remaining brothers then, of one of Gideon's sons, escapes. It is Jotham, Gideon's youngest son, and it is he who climbs to the top of Mount Gerizim after the slaughter and shouts that story of the trees. He tells of the fig tree, of the olive tree and the vine, mighty trees in the history of Israel, and of God's provision for his people throughout time. These trees know their purpose, they know their call to be productive and fruitful, to be generous in feeding and watering the people, to provide for others, to give themselves away, if you like, as servant trees. They have no need or desire to be king themselves. They are well regarded and of great importance because of what they do and what they already are. Jesus will say over 1,000 years later, "By their fruit will you know who are good leaders," when he says in Matthew 7, "Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will recognize them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes, or figs from thistles? So every healthy tree bears good fruit, but the diseased tree bears bad fruit." A thorn bush does not produce much fruit. He wants to be a leader for the sake of being a leader, and we are to watch out for that. It is one who pursues power and status. It strangles and stops growth. It is a menace to farmers. It's not a picture of life. It's a picture of something that is power-hungry. It's a picture of this power-hungry, violent king, Abimelech, seeking power because it feels good. And whilst the thorn bush offers shelter of sorts, it's not something you lean into. You certainly don't hug it or pat it or know its gift. It isn't great for fruit. A leader of God's people is called to offer shade and protection and sanctuary, flourishing for plants beneath its canopy. So we're to be careful what we wish for. As in the book of Judges, there are thorny days ahead for the people of God, and no one leans against the trunk of a thorn bush. The trees then tell us to be careful about the kind of leaders we seek and take leadership from. Times of uncertainty and struggle, stay close to something deeply rooted in God. From Ephesians 3, Paul prays for us, and I pray for you, being rooted and established in love, that you may have power together with all the Lord's holy people to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. So for reflection, what kind of fruit do we see in ourselves and others? We thank God for good fruit and ask him to increase the good and to prune back that which is bad. Next time we see each other, we'll look more closely at a couple of very different trees.